Oh my goodness, we've already started. This is Tylen Douglas Gabriel, Michael McKibben, and we have had a full week. Let me just read. Since the last time we got together, while all of our AIM cats out there, the Ukraine military withdraws, Georgia Guidestones destroyed, Boris Johnson resigns, Shinzo Abe assassinated, nuclear and natural gas get approved to be listed as green, and there is gold propaganda everywhere. And plus, there's all the research you and the miners have been doing, Mike. So where do we start? Our audience wants to know.
Well, I think that in general, what we're seeing here is a demand by these facts to be centered. And they're not centered yet because everybody's complaining about this. They're talking about that, and it's over here, and it's in that eddy, and it's over there, and that little distraction. And I think in general, what I encourage everyone who has an open mind to start looking to Britain for every one of these causes. And until we start naming the British have created this mess, and they're trying to hide from responsibility for it. But this mess has been created by them, and it's really taken about 140 years for them to really get to this point. But it has all been the British all the time. And until we say that,
I love that. It's like a radio station. All Brits, all the time.
Michael froze right on that. But
It's okay.
You bring up a very good point. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and people will say, they'll show me all their symptoms, but I'm always looking at the cause for the symptom. I don't want to treat the symptom, just mask it.
right.
And when I look at the world today and see all these events plus more, we could just name more and more and more. What is the cause? And the cause is what people won't talk about, and that's the Pilgrim Society.
Correct.
Now, Lillian Scott Troy knew about the Pilgrims a long time ago and tried to make us aware of him.
Now, let me say something, though, about Bojo. We can't jump over Bojo. This is the biggest news. He's the shortest term probably ever in English history, unless they chopped his head off afterwards. And he's been a liar ever since, the previous mayor of London. And let us not forget that he is called Boris the Turk because his great-grandfather fought against Ataturk to stop the Ottoman Empire from basically beginning. And he was then, of course, a dissident and came to England. So let's remember, Bojo, in his history, is full-on Muslim sympathizer beyond imagination. And as the mayor of London, he caused all of the people in London not to be able to have steak knives or knives to cut their bread because they had to be collected because the Muslims were allowed, the invading Muslims that they call migrants, which they really don't work. So how are they migrant workers if they don't work? But anyway, the whole life of everyone in London was changed because of his liberal Muslim attitudes. And when he became...
And that's just on his father's side.
And that's just on us. Yeah. And if we have bashed this man before and his escapades, that's not why he got fired. Here's why he got fired. He got fired, and 69 of his people quit, and his closest cabinet members quit. Why? Because of the following. They said his time was over, just like he said the pandemic was over from one day to the next, with no justification whatsoever. Bojo's dad, Stanley Johnson, wrote the book, The Marburg Virus. And Marburg is a city in Germany where they did, and on the front cover of the book is a picture of a monkey, monkeypox. Monkeypox was created there by experimenting with basically bioweapons. So Bojo knows everything about Pirbright, everything about the pandemic, and the reason he had to be in place there was to handle the pandemic because he, like his father, believes that the 70 million people in England should be reduced to 10 million because of overpopulation. And he states this. He stated it before. His dad has stated it. His dad's notorious for stating it. And then his grandfather, of course, was a Muslim full on. And then his great-grandfather was literally the ultimate Muslim who wanted to literally take Ataturk's place and take over Turkey, but under an even more theocratic version of Islamic.
And keep in mind,
control.
Turkey was the terrain of the Levant Company, which was the major source of opium for the British slave trade for hundreds of years.
That's right.
that same area.
He knows all about that. And he also knows and ordered Kinetic and Muriel and Pirbright to loose the Wuhan virus on the Chinese. Why? To disturb them from becoming the ultimate economic force in the world, because Britain doesn't have full control of China. They have good control of some parts of China and of Russia, but they don't have full control. And they also didn't have full control of the European Union, not only because some countries wouldn't join, but because the central bank just really didn't get it together. And so Bojo was sent in to separate from the European Union, and also as a World Economic Forum leader and trained leader, he was actually being manipulated. He was nothing more than a sock puppet for the globalists. And his job was to create the reset through a Ukrainian war. That's the reason he had his ministers recently. And the reason, really, the real reason why so many people quit 2 days ago, when they all started quitting crazy, is because he had his top military officer declare full mobilization and war against Putin unilaterally.
Well,
No
the
one
British
wants
have been wanting to conquer Russia for well over 100 years.
So no one mentioned that. And all the scandals, come on, that's just part of the gig over there in England. And he's not a pedophile. So if he's not a pedophile, he gets to do anything he wants, and he obviously has, and many illegal things. He's the only prime minister been charged with felony crimes, and that's repeated in those many ethical charges against him. But when it comes down to it, you have to remember that he is a Muslim, part of the global takeover of the world through creating the climate control carbon credits, which is nothing more than a new world currency through the United Nations, which is actually driven at this point by the World Economic Forum, because they don't have to answer to anyone, and they're secret, and those are all the big players. But the United Nations is the tool that is being used for so many of this. And also remember, they sent in the commandos, and the commandos did bomb, of course, under Bojo's orders. They sent in the commandos into Ukraine, and remember that Bojo and Zelensky are like bunk buddies. And the British commandos blew up the electric plant and the pipelines, basically, in Belarus. And so really, that's what the British were doing there, but they couldn't stop the 7-year-long bombing of the Ukrainians against the Donbass region. And now the war is over. Luhansk has been completely liberated. Donetsk was completely liberated recently, but no one wants to admit that. They've both been liberated. And what did Putin just say? I think it was yesterday. He said, I'm not done if I don't want to be done. Either they take my offer, or else I've only just begun. Well, that's what he did in Belarus. That's what he did in Crimea. And so what are the provisions? Here's the provisions. Donbass must remain liberated in independent regions. Well, what's the big deal about that? They had already voted and declared that, but for 7 to 8 years, they've been bombed nonstop, at least 100,000 deaths. So they must also, Ukraine, Zelensky and his fake government must acknowledge Russia's right to Crimea. Well, hello, didn't Obama give Crimea to Putin, I think, as well as he's going to take everything to the edge of Romania. So he really wants control. And what he wants to do is make Ukraine landlocked.
Well,
That's
we're
the whole
talking
mission.
about Boris Johnson. And what about the mother line, Michael? Were you going to give us a summary of that?
Yeah.
Waiting for Douglas to wind up, but that wasn't going to happen. So I just had to jump in.
That wasn't going to happen.
Sorry.
I got all upset.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was in the
this morning.
weeds.
The research that our researchers did on this was pretty thorough. So that's all available with the proof text. But basically, his on his mother's side, he is the great grandson of Sir George Williams. This does not appear in any of his official biographies. His Wikipedia is going on 100 pages, which is amazing for such a lightweight person intellectually. But anyway, Sir George Williams was the founder of the YMCA in 1844. Now we know the larger context because we've been tracking this for so long. What was going on was the bankers of the British Empire were funding many new developments. They were stealing patents right and left, intellectual property, and they were automating their industries, and they were creating social upheaval all over the country. And people who had been middle class employees suddenly were out of work, and this was occurring in every one of their major cities. And these oligarchs, of course, want to keep control. So what they decided they had to do was start figuring out various types of social mechanisms they could implement to put workers into their factories who had been displaced from their previous jobs and could gain a livable wage. And so what they did is they concocted this crazy idea. Let's start the Young Men's Christian Association. And they made up this story that sounds like the upper room of the Gospels. And they talk about this organization that was going to provide young men, specifically, a place to go to swim, to stay when they were in the big cities. And you can use your imagination what they had in mind. That's what we believe happened. They had in mind a way to control young men to be workers, slaves, debt slaves in the new urban centers of the not only Britain but all over the world. So within a year or two of 1844, they were funding magnificent new buildings all over Europe, and then within 5 years, all over the world. And it was just too much, too fast. And so when you look at it in hindsight, you said, well, of course it was. This wasn't about the story that we've always been fed. So what we see now is that Boris Johnson's great-great-grandfather was in charge of establishing a new form of debt slavery, of white and yellow debt slavery, that would allow the British oligarchs, the robber barons, to get to control their young men and then also get them to work in their factories. And this then continued several decades later with the Salvation Army, which was also heavily funded. And when you look at, in hindsight, at these organizations, you got to say, how did they survive on swimming fees and workout fees? Well, they didn't. That was just the front. And the real activity was controlling humanity, working humanity so that these robber barons, these bankers, now we're talking here, the Warburgs, J.P. Morgan, the Barclays, the Bevins, which is Carrie Johnson's, one of her middle names. Who else? The Barings, the Rothschilds, all of those banks, they wanted one thing. They wanted workers. They had lost their slaves after 1833, their black and brown slaves in the Abolition Act of 1833, and they were desperate to not only solve some of these social problems they created by this theft of patents and technology and the upsetting of the entire economies of the world. And so this was their answer. And so that then they also engaged in philanthropy. This is now we can see is the source of philanthropy. The reason they had to do that is they had to take their money and push some of it back into helping people survive the system they created. But in fact, those philanthropies became additional mechanisms of control. And the fact is, most of the money that they donated didn't actually go to the people they were supposedly trying to help, like the children. It's always about the children. They made these stories up left and right. And it was about how to further control. And then what they learned out of their philanthropy is they could use enough of that donated money to get their educators, to get their media people, to get their healthcare workers and their intellectuals and their authors to participate in helping them prop up this system that they were creating, which exists to this day, for funding this very evil system of two-tiered system where they control and everybody else works for them.
Well, I always like to think the YMCA is basically, it's a London creation, good old George Williams. And then, of course, his great grandson, who, he comes from two terrible lines. Actually, Boris Johnson comes from
great grandson.
Yeah, great grandson, and then his great grandfather on the other side, Ali Kamal.
Right.
These are some horrible people. But anyway, I always like to look at the fact that people say that London is the reincarnation of Rome. And in the end, the decadence of Rome, they would say that Rome was ruled and was ran in the Roman baths. And the Roman baths were nothing more than an excuse for taking their slave boys constantly, day in, day out, as homosexual baths. And the decadence was beyond anything you can imagine. Well, that's what got transplanted somehow to London, in my opinion. And if you look at these thousands of swimming pools, they always tell you they were created so that the children wouldn't drown, so that, we're from an island, and on the island, we must all swim or else we could drown by the terrifying ocean. That was the excuse they'd give you for making you go naked in their reincarnated Roman baths, where homosexuality, the home of homosexuality, was spread throughout the whole world and simply became nothing more than a sexual predator's dream.
Right.
And then you can see that all of these philanthropic groups, whether it be the Red Cross, whether it be the Salvation Army, whether it be the welfare system of England, whether it be the
YWCA,
it's all the same. It's
right.
manipulation of the lower class or caste people, and by, of course, the elite. And so it's disgusting that someone like Boris Johnson can come to power. Let's remember the pictures of him with his arms around Joseph Mifsud, and other pictures of him with his arm around George Papadopoulos, the two people at the center of the overthrow of Trump. Let's remember that he said that he called Trump so many names that I can't remember them because they're such beautiful British insults. Unequivocally an idiot was one of them. Unequivocally an idiot. He's unfit to rule. He's this man who is the paragon of the seven deadly sins is saying that Trump isn't fit to rule. Well, look at the British, that they would allow him through their system to rise up to lead that party.
Rule? Since when does our president rule?
I know.
Oh, since the British never left, then that's exactly what's happened. And people are now talking about the elections at their state and the midterms. And I'm like, you got to be kidding. These elections are nothing but selections by the Privy Council, the Pilgrim Society, Mark Malloch Brown. If you think for 1 minute that your vote counts in the United States of America, you are wrong. We need to correct that.
Well, since we're on that, was higher than the Queen. Remember, he lied to the Queen, dismissed Parliament so that he could get Brexit passed, because that's what George Soros told him to do. Because George Soros had given up on the European Union. No, it was probably
the machines again, the Optech rigging software that created the vote that Brexit passed.
Okay, so let me just throw a few facts in there.
Also,
well, yes, everything is rigged.
There's another guy that you never mentioned. That's Sir Nigel Knowles.
Yes,
Sir Nigel Knowles is a director of SGO Smartmatic. Sir Nigel Knowles was the longtime, 20 or 25 years, CEO of DLA Piper, one of the largest and most corrupt law firms on the planet, headquartered in London.
And that's Doug Emhoff. He licks the boots of Knowles.
Sir Nigel Knowles,
the husband of Kamala Harris, the illegal alien who is a pretender, and nobody will deport her. Where is her United States citizenship? She's an anchor baby at most, but I say she's not even a U.S. citizen.
Yep. Well, he's the handler for our president. I am convinced of that. And I need to mention, he is the chief trustee of the Prince's Trust. So he and Prince Charles have an entire organization called the Prince's Trust International, which is setting up offices all over the United States, folks. In addition to that, we have the Crown agents who work for London, for the monarch, and you get massive amounts of American money, taxpayer money, through contracts that the Senior Executive Service in the US has given to these organizations. So we have been gradually, the boiling water is starting to boil now. And what we're seeing at every turn, you see somebody that marches to the tune of London, of the monarchy, specifically of the Pilgrim Society. And when you talk about George Soros, you're not talking about anything other than a bunk buddy of Lord Mark Malloch Brown,
And Mitt
who,
Romney, he's also in that gang.
yeah, Mitt Romney is taking orders from them. So everybody we talk about in the United States is just a flunky of taking orders from these people. Why? Because as soon as they get to Washington, they're assigned to have to call all these corporations and beg for money. And those corporations are all run from the British Empire. Now, if you don't believe this, just look at any of the financial reports of any of the Fortune 100. And by and large, what you're going to see is they're all owned now by black in their financial reports. They're owned by BlackRock, Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, State Street Corporation, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan. So they're all of our companies are owned by the same people. And by the way, these are all the same organizations, all the same banks that funded the YMCA in 1844. So if you think we're making this up, just follow the money. And you're going to see that the British Empire eventually decided that they couldn't totally run the world through that mechanism they created in the mid 1800s. And so by 1902, they formed the Pilgrim Society. And then by 1909, they formed the Imperial Press Conference, and the Empire Press Union took control of not only propaganda, but also wireless telegraphy. And so when you march forward from there, you're going to find the same companies are still running the show, and they're running it from London, not from any place in the United States.
And
that's why they're getting away with it, because we're not looking at the right place.
That's right. The Rothschilds set the gold and silver spot price standard from the time it was began. They controlled it, and they controlled LIBOR rates. Well, why would Rothschilds do that? Because the gold that they stole from the Transvaal, and later, of course, the diamonds with De Beers, they literally began controlling all of England, because the gold that they had became the foundation for fiat currency. That was
Right.
They were given the sole monopoly of creating fiat currency for the Bank of England, which is the Central Bank of England, and that was the Rothschilds. Now let's look at that for a second, because we just had some big news. Biggest news. This news just attempted to devalue gold historically like no one has ever seen. We've never seen this. Never ever seen anything like this. That Zimbabwe. But
Zimbabwe.
I got to tell the story of how this
Rhodesia.
happened. Okay, so hang on. I'm going to talk about current stuff in a second. But first, Cecil Rhodes. If you look in Zimbabwe, there's about 1,400 active mines. They're usually small. And there's a small group, though, that produces most of the gold. And those all go back to things that were mines that were actually held by Cecil Rhodes and his group. And then when you go further south of Zimbabwe into what used to be called the Transvaal, the northeastern section of South Africa, you're going to get into the mines that he also had there. Now, who controls that? Forever, it was controlled by LONRHO, London Rhodesia, Lonro, and it was controlled by the Anglo-American, sometimes say corporation, sometimes company. It was then controlled by Cecil Rhodes' own personal mine called Goldfields, and then later by a group called Harmony, and also by a group called Metalon. But no matter what you do, they all go back to London.
The roads go back to
every bit of it.
The roads go back to Rhodes.
Yeah, all roads lead to Rhodes. That's correct. And so
to this day,
because now what I'm about to tell you is so incredible that it borders on stupidity, but it underscores what I'm saying here. They have controlled, of course, the gold, the biggest gold mines. The other big one is up in Ghana, and then, of course, Australia, and that's controlled by Merrick, which is Canadian. It's controlled by Barrick, which is a fake company, which George Daddy Bush was on their board for a long time. He basically created Barrick. And so you only have a few really big players, right? Well, when you look at them, it all comes down to who? The same group of people who own them. And literally in all of South Africa, certainly it's the British own all the major mines. And in Ghana, it's hidden through some front people. Okay, you can look and say, oh, look, they're actually Zimbabweans. No, they're not. Okay, now
there's always one or two that are the kingpins.
Yes. Now, Ghana, of course, everyone knows those are the gold mines of Solomon. They've been producing forever. And once you've been digging in a mine for that long, you know whether there's ore left. Now, the way that it works is they take samples of the ore, they measure it, and then they determine by where they found it, whether it's in a vein and this and this and this, and then they literally calculate how much is still in the ground. And then they sell that as futures. They sell it as literally.
So I'm glad you're on this subject. What helps me is to understand the scam, because you say you were holding a piece of ore in your hand, but the fact is that's not what you're selling. You're
Correct.
Selling what that is supposed to represent that's in the ground, right?
Correct.
Okay, so you never actually see the gold.
Correct.
Right. So somebody tells you, some magical, mystical auditor tells you, the geologist tells you that, well, based on what I see here, there's X hundreds of thousands of tons of gold in this deposit in the ground. A magical estimation that probably nobody can actually estimate.
But what's interesting is the timeline. This news comes out just as the Ukrainian military withdraws. In my opinion, what I am seeing here is that the Pilgrims they're in a world of hurt. They needed to crash the whole global economy to cover up on their massive shorts. In fact, their shorts are so big that you could take every asset on the planet and it still wouldn't cover their shorts.
Could you explain what a short is?
Well, they have overextended the credit of the fiat dollar. They have purchased things that are not anchored to reality. And so now is payday. And it has to happen. So instead of paying up, which they cannot do, it's like odious debt. Nothing can be done about it. So the system has to collapse. So they have planned for the collapse of the system, but it would collapse on we the people, on our backs. And we're saying, no, it's not going to happen that way. It's going to be on your backs. And so what they had to do was to create this gold to show that they have this wealth. Because Douglas, what was it? It was some crazy amount of gold that was being reported as a future. Now remember, what is a future? That is propaganda. It's a lie. Here, this gold out here exists. Now, if that gold out there exists and the amount that Douglas is going to tell you in a minute, then what is the value of the ounce of gold that you hold? It becomes less of value. So then you'd go, oh, look at all the gold. Oh, the gold in the Grand Canyon, the gold in Rhodesia. Well, I'll just go ahead and sell my gold. And then that's what they want you to do, or something like that. All right, how much gold? How much gold did they claim?
4 days ago, Zimbabwe, which used to be Rhodesia, which used to be southern.
And by the
Rhodesia,
way, it's only like 12 million people. I can't remember the exact population.
Small population.
It's population of one large city in the U.S.
They have more gold mines for the area, for both in population and area landmass for their country, than any place else in the world. And so, of course, those were completely tapped out a long time ago, or Cecil Rhodes and his gang would have never turned it over to the Zimbabweans. Okay, let's be real clear about this.
But the answer is it was like trillions of dollars of gold.
13 million tons of gold is what they said. And then later they modified it and said gold ore. Okay. And even then, if they don't tell you the percentage, you don't know what that means. Okay. Well, that was the largest find of gold in human history from an old mine.
But the other possibility is that they're stating this as pushing this propaganda so that they have a mine that they can run the gold that they've stolen from all of the world all this time. You can't just come out and say, here's the gold we stole. So what you do, you melt it down, you send it to a mine, and then the mine says, oh, we found some gold in here. It's the way you launder gold.
Yeah. What you're talking
Yeah.
about is the Japanese and the German gold after World War II was stolen, and it was put in. Now it's in gold bullion in Zurich, in the Zurich gold mine, Zurich bullion vaults at the Zurich airport. And that gold, no one knows, but there's only been 250 tons of gold ever discovered in all of human history. 150 tons of it are in the hands of nations as their reserves. Double or triple that amount is supposedly in the hands of people. But they claimed that they just discovered in Zimbabwe in an old mine 13 million tons of gold ore, estimated to be worth, the estimates were varied, but anywhere from $5 to $15 trillion. Oh, 2 days later, the Chinese claim, in a place where gold has never really been dug up, that they found 33 million. A new vein, 33 million tons of premium gold in Uganda, where it's never been found before. Well, that's the Chinese. If we say we went to the moon, 2 days later, the Chinese say they went to the moon, but they went to the dark side of the moon and they planted stuff there and they came back. Recently, Chinese sent out some pictures that they took when they went to the dark side of the moon, and they were so fake, it is ridiculous. The Chinese got on board when they saw the Brits were doing this. And now I'm going to predict that the gold mines in the Transvaal may also magically discover new veins also, so that they can do what? Collapse the gold market. And why do they need to collapse the gold market? All the articles that you read were misinforming, way crazy estimates of what it was worth. Nobody talking about the impact that would have upon gold. And also Zimbabwe stated that they're going to create gold coins and sell them, not for their poor people to get rich.
That was a funny part of the story.
But that's because that will cover any amount that they wish to have come out of those supposed mines. And then what did Uganda do? A company from China, of course, who probably owns the mine, China. They came and bought all the resources in Africa. So they probably own some dead mines. They now say they're gold mines. And what are they going to do? China's going to do the same thing Zimbabwe is going to do. 2 days after Zimbabwe announces it, they're going to make gold coins and everything else that they're selling. Now, let's remember, the Chinese just a few years ago got caught producing 7,000 tons of counterfeit gold bullion, because the international agency that checks out its authenticity went to look at the national holdings of the Chinese Communist Party, and it went from 2,000 to 9,000, so it would be 2,000 more than America has, so that it could take over the world currency, which I keep telling everyone. Until gold either comes out of the Zurich vault, or they find a fantastic amount of gold, or they want to reapportion the worth of gold on a massive scale, literally, saying that a gold ounce should be worth probably $50,000, and a silver ounce should probably be worth 15,000, 20,000. And that's what it would have to be readjusted to if they're going to use it. But they're not going to use it because hardly anyone holds silver in reserve. Even America has no reserves in silver. And here's what's amazing. The statistics I just gave you, I've been watching gold for a long time. Zimbabwe is barely mentioned. Last year, 19 tons of gold. That's really very, very little. And now they're going to do 4 times that or more, or magically just come up with all kinds of gold and coin it and sell it on open markets. Oh,
I love these stories, because these corruptocrats always pick a story and they put it in a location where the average person can never go and check their story. And then, so what then the person has to do, you and we have to rely on some third party auditor to verify whether what they're saying is true or not. But let's pick the names of the top 4 auditors in the world. What do we got? We got PricewaterhouseCoopers. We've got Ernst & Young. We've got KPMG. And we've got, who's the 4th one? EY, Pricewaterhouse, KPMG, and I'm blanking on the fourth one. But what we also see with those same auditors, if you go look at the financial reports of most of the major corporations in both the Companies House securities reports in London and its slavish SEC reports in the United States, you see these same auditors are auditing all of these corporate dynasties. So they're lying to us. They're all lying to us.
Is that, would it be Deloitte?
Deloitte, that's the fourth one. Yes, thanks.
Yes, and those liars are the ones who cause the crashes because they will certify bad mortgages, bundled bad mortgages as A class when they're
Right.
actually F class, below
Isn't
any
it interesting
class.
how these auditors they never come into the story when we talk about criminality, but it's their reports that are the basis that these cheaters use to justify all their actions.
And as we know, as Betsy was just mentioning, it's the derivative betting. Now, all derivative betting internationally is cleared through the Bank for International Settlements because they're the settlement group. They're the clearinghouse. So when I want to bet $4 trillion that gold is going to go up tomorrow or down tomorrow, the Bank for International Settlement has to clear that. And then somebody has to buy that bet, that derivative. And then one of us is going to lose, one of us is going to win. Well, that is how they adjust their assets. Their balance sheet is all done by paper gold and paper silver and things that they can move around in paper, particularly gold. And so when we're talking about this gold coming out, the big response from the economists was, well, this will prove that gold, which right now we're in a recession, gold is supposed to go up. Well, gold's going to go down because they just found more gold than we've ever found in history before. So gold is going to go down. And somebody made a bet on that. A big bank like, Deutsche Bank did it once for $4.5 billion and couldn't clear. They wouldn't clear it because they were going to lose the bet. And if they lost the bet, Deutsche Bank would fall, the other big German bank would fall, and a couple others would fall. So that's what she's talking about. There's more derivative betting than all of the currency in the whole world, more or less than all of the known assets, liquid assets in the world. Of course, that's not counting offshore.
Well, one of the things that helped me understand this whole gold scam is and the importance of having mines. And if we point out Rio Tinto, which is probably the largest mining corporation in the world, which is owned by the British monarch, includes a lot of gold mining, uranium, and a number of different ores all over the planet. And they have a lot of mines. And these futures that we're talking about are where they send geologists out, and these geologists come back with these reports and estimate how much ore is in the ground and what's the quality of the ore, and therefore people start making markets on the promise that those mines are ever going to pull any ore up at all. And so what we now see is that's all a scam, because all that person has to do, one person has to just say, well, there are so many ounces of ore. And then if the market wants to, the market will believe that person, and then they're off to the races, and everybody will pretend as if that person's telling the truth. And that's the scam. They can make that story up. It's all propaganda. It has nothing to do with science or geology or anything else. Just make it up, but make sure nobody can check you. That's a real key here.
Absolutely. And that's the reason that China and Russia attempted to, both separately and together, create a new currency that would be gold backed. And that's the reason this is coming out. This is an attempt to match up to the reset. But the problem is that they were going to take the gold, which, in my opinion, the 150 tons of missing gold is in Zurich. In other words, more gold.
Isn't it at the end of the airport? You always identify it, and
Yes.
vaults at the end of the airport. But look,
we've shown pictures of it.
I want to segue into this story where Zelensky is asking Canada, a Canadian company, can't think of the name, it might be Zybold or something. What is it? Your mute is off.
Siemens.
Siemens, thank
Siemens,
you.
however you
Siemens,
pronounce
whatever it is, which is a German company, and has asked the Canadians not to ship the turbine over to Nord Stream. So that, because if they don't have the turbine, the Nord Stream can't run. Did I totally butcher that?
No,
but I
no,
think
that's
it's
absolutely
big,
right.
because the thing is
You
I'm
mean
going,
this
wait a minute,
actor is
wait a minute,
now
wait a
giving
minute.
instructions
Yeah,
about
Correct.
engineering?
No, but
Correct.
look at this. Look how paralyzed. They're like warlords at the top of the apex, and they're fighting each other, and they've got themselves in a position they're not going to win. So if the turbine isn't installed on the Nord Stream, then they can't get gas into Germany. But then they want Russia to be the one to say, we're not sending gas into Germany. How is Germany going to get their fuel in the winter?
Ultimately, Zelensky is saying, Europeans, I want all your children to die. I want your businesses to die, and everything's on the line. And if you don't make me a member of the European Union and a member of NATO and come to my defense after I just bomb my people the entire time I've been in office, every single day, killing my people in Donbass, I'm going to get mad at you.
But the whole thing is being
This
orchestrated
is
by
what
the
he's actually
Pilgrims.
saying.
The Pilgrims have got to be behind it because they operate in Canada. They
Pilgr-
operate in the UK.
We know the Pilgrims just declared war. The British just declared war on Putin unilaterally.
Well, Siemens is a Pilgrim's operation. Okay, you say it's German, but that is just one of the key providers for the entire technological base that these guys are trying to capitalize on to take down our countries.
Yes.
No, and then they realize they're in a predicament. So then it's the European Union that has decided that nuclear and natural gas are going to be considered green now, because they had this moment where they're like, we are not going to have any fuel at all. And that includes the Predator class. Maybe they're not prepared.
You turn and talk to me, Betsy, Tyler, you always make my head, explode, because you say, oh, did you notice that the turbines in Canada that Zelensky is saying don't send them to Nord Stream 1? I'm going,
hang on, wait a second. Turbines in Canada, yes. Siemens is in Germany.
It doesn't matter. This story, who knows whether any of it's true? Here's the point.
Hey, Michael, the world, here's the point. This stuff is made all over the world.
Yeah, but the Canadians aren't making Siemens turbines.
It doesn't matter. The point is Zelensky believed it. And then Zelensky is saying that he wants the last of the 5 pipelines going to Europe from Russia, giving them their lifeblood. Some nations in Europe, 65% of their oil and natural gas comes from Russia through these pipelines. Zelensky cut off the 2 pipelines through Ukraine. He bombed and cut off one, and they believe the second, and we don't have confirmation. The second Belarusian pipeline has been exploded. We know that the power running those pipelines was hit by British commandos and bombed by them. And so now we know that Nord Stream 2, remember, Nord Stream 1 was a secret between Angela Merkel and Putin, brought in all the oil for years and years, provided 40% of the oil in general for all of European nations. She never told anybody she was doing it, and she made all the money off of it. Okay. That's the one that they say isn't working now, but they put in a second one when they said when Obama put sanctions on Nord Stream 1 and Trump didn't remove them, they still flowed, but with sanctions. But then Nord Stream 2 was built, and then the British and the Americans came in 2 days after it started and said, engineering problems, close it down.
Oh, I see. Okay, engineering. Look, this is not magic engineering. No. This is a pipe that's got a big pump on it. I mean, give me a break. Even if they blew it up, they could replace it in
a minute.
Months.
Do you know how quick they laid Nord Stream 2? It was like unbelievable.
Okay,
But it's all fear porn. This is all to get people afraid, make up stories, whatever it takes, just to make them up so they won't know what's really happening.
Now let's remember what Putin did. As soon as they said, "Oh, Nord Stream 2, we're closing you down," and they insinuated, and I never found proof until I heard this, and it sounds like this is indicating that it's true that Nord Stream 1 is either flowing very little or not at all. Then Putin said, fine, I will sell double the amount of oil tomorrow to China that all of Europe buys for an entire year, and y'all can kiss my Russian grits. And in one day, he overcame
think about a pipeline. So when you say they blew it up, they didn't blow the whole thing up. They probably blew
Yeah,
up a
little section
junction.
of it. Yeah.
Okay, so what they did is they went up line and they turned it off so it wouldn't flow and go all over the ground. Then they went down line and they cut that off. Then they replaced that segment. This doesn't take. I mean, this is just engineering, and any competent engineer can fix that. So
Yeah.
these are stories by lawyers and propagandists and academics who, excuse my language, don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Oh, I know. All these experts on the news tell you all this stuff, and you go, well, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. When they told
Right.
me that on one day, 13 million tons of gold was found. That's what they said. And
Yeah,
then
that
2
was
days later,
amazing.
33 million tons were found. I'm like, are these people just stupid? That's not human. That's not possible in the physical world. That's just crazy talk. But once you see the propaganda and you see what it is they're doing, and yes, that junction you're talking about that they went upstream of, that's what the British attacked. The junction of that went into actually 3 pipelines coming out of Russia, 2 going into Belarus and 1 going in that wasn't very well supplied, but it was going only and directly to the Ukrainian people. Zelensky blew up his own oil. Okay. Zelensky killed his own people. And so
Yeah.
Zelensky, who's telling everyone how to live and telling all world leaders what to do and telling us now we can't ship something from Canada to get Nord Stream 1 going because that's bad, needs to be considered a war criminal beyond imagination. He is a full-on party of the regions / that means Nazis. They were the original Nazis. Okay. That's who he is. And he is nothing more than a Soros puppet. And the minute that he gets a chance, they will either they will kill him or he's already, I told you, he already made a deal in Belarus early on where they gave him money. He went there, he was made one quick 2-minute announcement to the peace treaty, to the peace negotiations, which where did the peace negotiations go, by the way? He got paid and he left. That's what's going on. And he'll probably either disappear, he'll be killed, or he will simply disappear and go to Russia because he'll get such a good payoff as soon as he turns the country over to Putin. And in the end, that is what he will do. But right now, he's draining the West. America alone, 80-some billion dollars. Britain just a couple days ago, another $1 billion from Britain had to give to. But
well, these guys have to line their pockets, and Zelensky's letting them do it. So this is not grifters. This is the opposite of that. These are the major thieves of the banking and tax systems of the world right now, and they're feeding each other, and they all know they're feeding each other.
Banking was mostly for currency exchange. It first started off in the temples, and it was money paid to the temple, and the money was usually held to reserve grain. So you would bring your grain to the temple that you were going to use to plant the next year. They would give you coins to represent it. And then when you went to plant, you brought the coin back and they would give you that amount of grain. Okay. That's where it all started. But when they started changing money between different coinage systems and currency exchange, that's when the evil began. I charge money to change it from your type of money to my type of money or anybody else's type of money. I get a surcharge, just like gold. They sell you a gold coin and they're going to charge you $70 to sell you that gold coin for processing. Well, that's insanity. And so what's happening here is with the BRICS, China said the other day, and when I heard that Russia had invited all those other countries, I thought, oh, that's not good. Then I found out the truth. It was Russia. It was China speaking for Russia, and China invited all these other countries to join BRICS so that they could take all their united currencies and create a new world currency that they could exchange the big things on, which would be oil mostly and grain and, the things that are being fought over in the Ukraine. So are they going to be able to do that? No. That's the reason the fake gold is going to come out. And I promise you, China within 1 year will get 7 tons at least of gold from their new mines in Uganda. And no gold will actually be produced by those mines. And China then will attempt again, because when they say they join with other people in BRICS, that's a lie. China doesn't work with anyone. You must be kidding. You'd have to be an idiot to believe that. Okay, so there's not going to be.
So you're saying that will happen even if Ernst & Young certifies the audit of the actual gold?
They
You're
don't.
saying you don't
They
believe
don't.
Ernst and Young.
Those aren't the auditors. The auditors are the International Gold. Blah, 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 blah. This is this
No,
long
I'm
title they
just
have.
using them as a
No, if the
metaphor.
auditors say it, no.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, here's what happened. When the Chinese found what was found out, they had all this counterfeit gold. They looked in all the gold vaults throughout the world, and they found all the gold vaults had been tainted, and they were just slightly covered with gold, mostly tungsten. And they were doing gold exchanges, so they'd get real gold and give you the fake gold. So in Nova Scotia, in the Shanghai gold exchange, in all the places that you can buy and sell gold, they looked in those vaults, and what did they find? Filled with fake Chinese gold. What happened? Nothing. Nothing happened. They were never charged. Nothing happened. Why? Because you can't bring China to justice. Never happened and never will happen as long as the Communist Party is in charge there and they have a dictator like Xi. But his
But
time is coming to an
I'm
end.
sure the same thing goes on with the London gold, the Rothschild
Of course.
vaults.
Of course.
I mean, we don't really know what's there.
Now, China's problem is that Japan and Shinzo Abe has been shot. He was the #1 representative in Japan for going to war with China if they attack Taiwan. Okay? You know how
Wow.
amazing that is, that that person who shot him is no doubt a Chinese agent working for China to kill anyone, because if anyone even says the word Taiwan, China won't do business with you. That includes America. You are not allowed to say Taiwan. And because they believe they own Taiwan, and you've seen all the military exercises they're doing. So if Japan says they're going to defend Taiwan, that just put an end to Chinese aggression against Taiwan,
Well,
because America
this
won't do
story
anything.
of Taiwan goes right back to Mao Zedong and the British involvement there, which was the YMCA, by the way.
YMCA.
They used the YMCA as their embassies to take over China, to put Mao Zedong in power, and Chiang Kai-shek was fighting against Mao and pushed them off to Taiwan. This all goes back to the British. Let's stop talking about all these surrogates around the world and start talking about London. When we start focusing the attention on London, we're going to get somewhere. Until we do, we're just going to be spinning our wheels.
Well, look at Lillian Scott Troy, who discovered the Anglo-American / Pilgrim / Cecil Rhodes 200-year plan to make sure that America is still a colony of Britain and that it never leaves the fold.
By the way, a new term has emerged from this research over the last few days. They actually discussed it in some of these newspapers we're finding, and they called it the annexation of the USA. That's a quote. And there's even a quote of Carnegie, that Carnegie said the reason Edward VII came to see him and offer him a dukedom up in Scotland a few months after Edward was enthroned was that he asked Carnegie to arrange for the annexation of the USA. That's in the newspapers. And there, I had never seen that term, annexation of the USA, but that was on their minds. They wanted it to happen, and they actually thought it was going to happen.
And then Carnegie came in, took over all the news agencies, all libraries,
Exactly.
and controlled everything that Americans were allowed to think.
Right. J.P. Morgan was right behind him and took editorial control of all of our major newspapers.
It's just sad that the British plan is so simple and clear, and so few see it. And Lillian Scott Troy saw it, and she got literally deported because she became a thorn in their side. And she was a suffragette and a very liberated person, and they can't stand that.
By the way, she also owned a cinema theater. She was in the early days of cinemas in England. We're just learning this, and she actually owned a cinema, a well-appointed cinema in Croydon, which is in southern London. And the British confiscated that when they kicked her out. But we now know that was the same time as the British War Propaganda Bureau, later to become the Department of Disinformation in the War Cabinet. was planning on the takeover of cinema as it was coming out. And clearly she was offering competition and they couldn't have it. So they confiscated her cinema.
It's the war propaganda board, it's
Yeah,
just they have to control it so they can control the narrative. And then they control the economy and they control the slaves because the people at the top want to stay there. And they do it by fake social welfare programs, philanthropy, the YMCA, the Red Cross, you name it. Anything you think is good, look closely. It is a write-off for those people doing it. It's like Bill
correct.
Gates donating money to the CDC. Hello, he owns a bunch of those patents and rights to those patents. He shouldn't be allowed to donate to this organization. And as I always say, CDC never puts the word P at the end, prevention, because they are not about prevention. They're about controlling disease, creating it and controlling it, which is Pirbright Institute. And Bojo knew all about the Pirbright Institute because his daddy wrote about it. The movie Outbreak was taken from Bojo's daddy's book. Stanley Johnson wrote the book, The Marburg Virus, which is Virus X, which I've been telling everybody about for
Well,
years.
so for those of you who are into British authors, we're now seeing that G.K. Chesterton was also savvy to what was going on and actually wrote about the Pilgrims and their secret society and how deadly it was going to be to the future of the British peoples if they were allowed to continue.
Absolutely. So that's why the Truth History Project is so important, why we put our life blood into it, sweat, time, our passion, and all the people who help us. I want to first off thank them. I don't know how many of
Yes.
you there are, but just the ones who communicate with me are enough to keep me more than busy all the time. So we want to thank you and all your support. And there's been a tremendous amount of outpouring of monetary support, but we're going to keep this up and we're going to keep providing you with this information. And our producer, Betsy, Tyler Gabriel, tells us, we need to talk once a week because people really need to hear this. Otherwise, they really get subject to the fear mongering you were talking about a minute ago, Michael. This is the way they control you. So if you can be liberated, and that's the reason we also give you spiritual insight too, you need to be liberated from the delusion, the illusion of the physical world, because this world, you are born into your father, the devil, and the demons run rampant here, but they work through people. So when we're talking about these people, the reason we have to reveal who they are, like Bojo, and the evil that the man has perpetrated throughout his whole life,
Carrie Johnson.
we have to. Why? Because it's the only way to bring them to light so that they no longer have power, because their power works in the darkness and we work with the truth, with the light, with wisdom. And that's what we're about. So thank you for your support, and thank you for your continued support of our mission here. And Michael, thank all of your miners. I never get to talk with them because I know they're all too scared to stick their neck on the chopping block. But thank you, and thank you for Betsy's team. It takes that whole team to
Betsy's
keep me
team
straight.
is still waiting for Alex Jones to interview Michael McKibben, the most significant entrepreneur of our time. The theft of social media networking is the key to all of this. And still, Alex is silent. Why? You have to ask why.
I don't know.
Yeah.